All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have a few people in the room. Most people are online. Thanks for coming, especially with the weather today. I'm Lauren LaPuma. Actually, one second. There we go. I'm Lauren LaPuma. I'm from the CIRES Communications team, and I am so lucky to be joined here by Maria Raykova from NOAA, and I'll let her introduce herself in just a moment. But just so you know a little bit about me, so I've been with CIRES for between 1.5 years and 2 years now, but I've been doing science communication for about 10 years, and I'm a little ADHD about it. I like to dabble in everything. So I've done a lot of writing, editing, photography, video production, podcasting, graphic design, and recently getting into animation as well. I've actually done a lot of work shooting footage and tagging along with researchers in the field. So I've done a lot of shooting video in extreme environments. And video is one of my passions. I really like it. So I am super happy to share my expertise with all of you today. And I will now turn it over to Maria to introduce herself.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Raykova. I'm a multimedia specialist working with the comms team in the NOAA Research Headquarters office. I'm an animator by training, but I've also done a fair share of video production and editing. And I joined the team earlier this year, so I'm fairly new to NOAA. Prior to NOAA, I worked mainly in the field of online education. I created videos and illustrations for adult learners in healthcare and engineering. And I've also done some work over the years with a few different educational YouTube creators. So I have experience creating content for a general audience as well. So I really appreciate Lauren giving me or inviting me to share my experience with you today, and I'll let her take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, so Maria and I are going to kind of tag team this from each of our perspectives, share our own tips and tricks. And just so you all know, we are going to send you all the slides and the recording of this presentation afterwards, along with some other resources. So you don't need to take notes unless you really want to. And another thing to note is we're not going to go super technical into like the hands-on aspects of actually editing video and things like that. If you do want a training like that, send me an email. I have our email here, ciresnews@colorado.edu, and we'll get something like that set up. That's just way better in a small group setting. So I do want to offer that to you all. So just let me know, shoot me an email if you're interested. But for now, we're just kind of focus on the more conceptual aspects of producing videos and animations. And so what we're going to cover today, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CIRES Science Illustration Contest, which is the reason that we're doing this training right now. We're going to go briefly over some best practices for communicating with a lay audience. So anytime you're communicating outside of academia. Then we'll dive into the principles and basics for video and animation. We'll give you guys some insight on software and tools that are available to you. And then Maria and I will each share our own little pearls of wisdom from our experience. And then we'll give you guys resources and leave the time for questions. And for those of us who are in the room, we do have snacks coming at 2. So as soon as we're done, we can just hang out, get some snacks, chit chat, and then we can go about our days. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. So the reason that we're doing this training now, and we have some other trainings upcoming in the next few months, is that we are holding an inaugural science illustration contest at CIRES early next year. So why are we doing this? Well, a few years ago, CIRES revised its strategic plan and divided up our goals into 4 major imperatives. And one of them is to enhance the impact, accessibility, and reach of our science and data to all of the key audiences that we communicate with, the broader scientific community, NOAA, policymakers, educators, et cetera. So one place we thought that we could really use a boost was in our multimedia production and skills. So we've decided to start a contest that will challenge CIRES researchers to create their own illustrations or visualizations. It could be of their own science, it could be of a scientific concept, and we want it to be for a general non-science audience. This could be anything visual that is not a photograph. It could be an infographic. It could be an illustration, whether hand-drawn or digital. It could be a video. It could be an animation. It could be a time lapse, any type of data visualization. So anything visual that's not a photograph. And to help all of you prepare for this, we're going to offer a bunch of trainings. And the goal is really to help all of our researchers just become totally amazing visualizers, especially for thinking about other audiences. So right now we're doing video and animation here in November. Early next year, we're going to do more trainings on graphic design and digital illustration, and then talk about data visualization as well. In March, we're going to open our contest, and we're going to have some kind of office hour one-on-one sessions with experts. So whoever is creating content can come and get help and feedback. We'll close the contest and judge the entries in April, and then announce the winners in May at Rendezvous. So you don't have to enter the contest if you're attending a training. You can take all the trainings and then do nothing, or you can enter the contest and not take any training. It's very flexible. We open it up to you guys, how much you want to engage with this, but more info will be coming in the next month or so. So I'm going to dive into giving you guys just a quick general overview of some best practices for communicating with a non-science audience. And there's so much detail that we could go into, so I'm happy to go into more discussion as you guys want or need, but for now, we'll just do a quick overview. So the first thing you really want to do is think about who your audience is and really think about it in detail. Who are they? So whatever project you want to work on, whatever kind of content you're going to create, think about who you are actually wanting to reach. Are they children? Are they adults? Are they teens? Are they students? Are they a group within any of those? Maybe it's a local community group that you work with. Maybe it's your rock climbing buddies. Maybe you really want to tailor something to decision makers and policymakers at local, state, or national levels. Maybe you just want something for a super general audience and you don't want to narrow it down any further than that. That's fine. Just think about it ahead of time. The reason you want to think about your audience is you really need to tailor your content to your audience's level of familiarity with the subject matter and also their perspective. So first thing to think about, especially for adults, is when was the last time they took a science class or maybe a class in your field? For most adults in America, the last time they took a science class was high school, maybe college. So what that just means is you have to provide a little bit more background and context for the work, because they're not going to be as familiar with the subject matter and some of the terms that you're using. What is their perspective? What do they care about? Think about that. If it's a local group that you're talking to, they may have different priorities. They may care about different things than someone far away. For example, here in the West, it's drier. We really care about having enough water. On the East Coast, that's not as much of an issue. So just think about those kinds of things, and then how your science is relevant to the audience, how it ties into what they care about. And the more you can do that, the more your audience will engage with and connect with your content. So once you've thought about your audience, what you really want to do is distill everything that you want to communicate down to a few key messages. Think about maybe 3 or so main points that you want your audience to remember from your content. It's like if they take away nothing else, what are the couple things that you really want them to remember? And I know this might be hard for some of you to hear, but not every detail is important. You really do need to simplify as much as possible. And this is especially important for video and animation, which Maria and I will talk about, because you don't have control over how much time the audience has to spend with the material. It's going to go by quickly. So you want to make sure that it's simple and presented in a streamlined way as much as possible. And also, when communicating with non-scientists, you really want to focus on the big picture, the so what. What did you find if you have results? And why should the audience care? That really needs to be stated clearly and stated up front at the very beginning of the video or close to the beginning, or whatever piece of content you're creating. I have this graphic up here just to give a little bit of background. When we communicate with non-scientists, we tend to start with, again, like I said, the results and implications. What did you find? Why did you care? This is like the typical news style. It's called the inverted pyramid. It's very different from when you write a scientific paper, an abstract, or a presentation. You start with your intro, background, and then move forward chronologically. News style is the opposite. And you don't need to study this in detail, but the point is just to show that what a non-scientist cares about is what were the results, or what is the main thing about the science you're trying to communicate, and why should they care? And you really need to use plain language. Try to avoid or minimize your jargon and technical terms as much as possible. Sometimes you do need to introduce a new term for your audience, and that's okay. Just make sure you define it and that you're not introducing too many new terms at once because they won't be able to absorb it very quickly. So here's an example from the British Antarctic Survey. This is a good example of taking kind of that news style and where they are starting large from a very wide perspective and then zooming in. And so this is a video kind of explaining why the British Antarctic Survey and the US Antarctic Program are looking at the Thwaites Glacier.
One of the greatest challenges we face in the next century is the rising sea levels and the danger this presents to people living by the coast. Antarctica holds 90% of the planet's ice, and what happens there is a major influence on how much and how fast sea levels will rise. West Antarctica alone has enough ice to raise global sea levels by more than 3 meters. And this region is under threat because the mighty glaciers are changing. The largest and the most concerning is Thwaites Glacier. This glacier is the size of Great Britain and larger than the US state of Florida. The ice is over 1 kilometer thick, but it's collapsing. So experts from the US and UK have joined forces to try and find out why. Research shows that the final point where the glacier rests on bedrock, called the grounding line, is retreating as warmer ocean water melts underneath the ice shelf. It's moved 14 kilometers since 1992. Ice that was on land has melted or is now floating on water, and so raising sea levels. And the downward slope of the bedrock means that as the grounding line moves back, it exposes a thicker slice of ice to lift off the land, thereby accelerating the flow of ice into the ocean. In the last 30 years, the amount of ice being lost to the sea from Thwaites Glacier has increased, and with neighboring glaciers accounts for more than 10% of global sea level rise. And if this continues, many of our major coastal cities will be under threat from more frequent and extreme flooding. So, it's vital that we take action. Reducing our emissions of greenhouse gases may delay or even prevent ice sheet collapse, but it is certain that understanding changes to Thwaites Glacier will improve projections and help governments and society to protect coastlines around the world and to adapt to rising sea levels.
All right, I love this video because it kind of exemplifies everything that I've been talking about. No jargon, except they do introduce the term of grounding line, but they really clearly explain what that means. They start wide and zoom in, tell us why we should care, what we can do about it, what scientists are doing. So wonderful example there. Ooh, sorry. Keep going. There we go. So another tool that you can incorporate into your communication with a non-science audience is storytelling. And storytelling is something that human beings have been doing probably since we evolved. It's just kind of a way for us to take in information in a way that's easy for us to remember. And so to do this, there's a couple of different things you can do. First is you can try to incorporate a narrative structure into your content. And by that, I mean, you could take that a couple different ways. You could think of it as breaking your story up or your content up into a beginning, a middle, and an end. Or you can actually incorporate a true narrative arc, which is what this chart or graph right here is showing. And this is like kind of the most basic structure of a narrative. And you can kind of think of it as a graph of tension over time. So in the beginning of your story, we call that the exposition. This is where you're setting your scene, telling everyone what's going on in the world of your story. The tension is low, not much is happening, things are going on as usual. At some point, there's some incident that causes the tension to rise. And during this part, we call the rising action. This is when your characters have conflicts, obstacles that they're trying to overcome. It continuously builds the tension until you get to the point of the climax, where the tension is released. This is where the monster, the dragon, is slain. You've solved your problem. Frodo throws the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Story has come to its climax. But the story doesn't end there. It keeps going. You have what you call the falling action, which is everything that leads to the resolution of the plot. So after Frodo throws the ring into Mount Doom, he's not done. He's got to get back to the Shire. They've got to figure out what's going on with the kingdoms of Gondor and blah, blah, blah. So you have all of that. And then finally, you get to your resolution or your what we call the denouement, which is tying up all those other loose ends. Frodo goes back to the Shire. Then he's like, nope, I'm done. Sam marries his girl back home, and the movie ends. So, and the thing to point out is the denouement, so where you end here, is not at the same level where you began because things have changed. The characters have grown, the situation has changed. You're not coming full circle, you're going to a different place now. But the tension has decreased and life goes on. So you can think about this when you're working on your content. Another thing that might help is incorporating a theme. There are a lot of themes that pop up in literature that are really relevant or applicable to science. I've listed a couple of them here. I'm not going to go into detail of them, but I have some examples at the end of this presentation you can look at. You can think about your work or the story you're trying to tell through one of these lenses. That might help guide you. And then add a human element. And I know as scientists, you all are pretty much trained to take yourself completely out of the equation and to be as objective, as unbiased as possible. And that's great. But when you're telling a story to a non-science audience, you got to add a little bit of yourself back in. The audience isn't going to connect with numbers or facts or figures. They're going to connect with you and your experience or the experience of the characters in the story. So try to, work in excitement, emotions, your own personality. Talk about your successes and your failures and challenges to show that it's not just science isn't just one and done. You do your experiment and that's the end. There are dead ends there. You have to backtrack. You have to start over. Talk about those things because people identify with those experiences. Show action and emotion as well. So, and the point of this is really not only to educate your audience, but to engage and entertain them. So that's a super quick overview of communicating outside of academia. And so now Maria and I are going to dive right in and talk about some principles of video and how those tips apply. So Maria, you're up.
Yep. So before we actually dive into talking about making videos, I just want us to consider this question because sometimes people just assume that video is the best choice by default. And so I want to talk about why that may or may not be the case for you. So I'll start by mentioning two key attributes that are unique to video. First is that it is a time-based medium. So that makes video really good for depicting processes or changes that are happening over time. And secondly, it is an audio-visual medium. So you have the opportunity to use two different sensory channels to communicate with your audience if you take advantage of that. And so when we combine both of these attributes together, you can see how video is a uniquely powerful and effective tool for storytelling, just like Lauren already talked about. So if we consider an example in science communication, let's say the topic is the water cycle. In the water cycle, there are a lot of different things happening simultaneously, and it is cyclical in nature. So for those reasons, I would argue that a diagram or an illustration might be a better choice just to capture all of that in one snapshot and really show how all those individual parts are relating to the big picture overall. But on the other hand, a video could be the better choice if you want to go beyond just explaining what the water cycle is, but also looking at the wider implications of it and why it matters or people should care. So we don't have to play the example, but you can refer back to it if you're interested. And before I move on, I just want to mention a few more disadvantages of video, and this is not to dissuade you, but just for your awareness. First is that it does tend to be pretty time-consuming to produce videos or animation. And along with that, it can be a bit of a hassle to update or change anything in the future. So for your video topic, I recommend choosing something that's more evergreen, that you don't expect that you'll need to come back and update it in the foreseeable future. And then lastly, if you're creating something to serve as a reference that you think people might come back to it often, then video might not be ideal because the viewer has limited control over the pace of the video, and it's not as easy to skim and find the information you're looking for at a glance, compared to, let's say, a paragraph of text or an illustration. So of course, in an ideal world, we would have all of the above, right? We would have an article and an image and a video, so people could get the information in whatever way they prefer, but we don't always have that luxury, sadly. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so now, assuming that you are making a video, let's talk for a second about live action and animation. So I've outlined here what I see as some of the strengths of each of those categories. And starting just from the practical standpoint, the advantage of live action is that there's a very low barrier to entry, right? Anyone can take out their smartphone and start recording a video. On the other hand, animation has the advantage that you can represent things that might be impossible to film with a camera, like a more theoretical concept, let's say. So your decision to go one way or the other, it could just come down to necessity and practicality, but I would also encourage you to think about these as two different and complementary styles of communication. So live action is going to bring authenticity, realism, and nuance to your subject, whereas animation tends to simplify things down to a more distilled essence. And so I think the most effective approach is to use both of them at different points in your video, and that's very often what we see in documentaries and science videos. And again, we don't have to play this example in the interest of time, but this is from Quanta Magazine, which makes really great videos, and they tend to be more abstract, like math and physics topics. So I recommend checking them out at some point if you are interested in like thinking about how to visualize those types of concepts. Next slide. And back to Lauren.
All right. So thanks, Maria. So when you are ready to produce a video or animation, there's 3 stages that you're going to go through: pre-production, production, and post-production. They're kind of self-explanatory. Pre-production is your planning stage, and it is absolutely 100% the most important stage. It's really, really good to plan out what you're going to do ahead of time. Production is where you are capturing and or producing your visuals and your audio. This is where you're shooting your footage. Maybe you're making your animation. And then post-production is where you're going to edit and polish your finished product. And there are some terms that we use in the video world. It's really good to familiarize yourself with some of them. And we've put some links in this presentation for you that will help go to some glossaries and things like that. So we're not going to go over them now, but it's good to look at. So in pre-production, like I said, it's the most important phase. This is where you're really going to think about your audience, your purpose, kind of what is the point of your video? What are you trying to get out of it? What do you want your audience to take away from it? And there's no wrong answer here. It could be maybe you just want to describe something or show something visually in a really elegant way. Maybe you want to fight misinformation that's going on in the news. Maybe you want to, debunk a myth or a theory. Or conspiracy theory, or maybe you just want to educate, maybe you want to entertain. Just think about that ahead of time. What is the scope of your video? What is it going to cover? And your budget, if you have one. Maybe you don't have one, and then you have to just kind of do it all on your own. But if you have some money for it, that's great. And a very common thing to do is to create a storyboard. This is basically just where you take your visuals and whatever script or narration you're using and pairing them together and putting them in a logical order. And it does not have to be the final visuals. It's usually not. It's usually just a representation of it. So here's an example right here. So it's just a photo that represents, or a drawing that represents what's going to be on screen, and then the script or the narration that's going to go along with that. This is a really good tool for you to use. It really helps organize and get your thought process in order. One thing that I like to try to do is to lead with the most interesting visuals that will really hook your viewer and grab them and keep them engaged in the beginning of your video. And don't rely too heavily on a narration or a script. I like to think of it as kind of a way to connect ideas and thoughts rather than being the main driver of the story. Because for a video or an animation, the visuals should really be driving the story. And Maria, back to you.
Yeah, so at this stage, you might be asking yourself, how long should this video be? And The simple answer I would give to that is it should be as short as reasonably possible to get your key points across. And that's why one of the most important tasks in this whole process is deciding what those key messages are, like Lauren already talked about. Also keep in mind that the shorter your video is, the easier and faster it'll be for you to make the video. So that's a plus. And in terms of how long is too long, I personally don't think that there's any magic number or a rule that you need to stick to, but there could be a time limit based on where you want your video to be shown. So for instance, Instagram Reels has a time limit. So something like that you should be thinking about. But having said that, I want to stress that the quality of the content matters more than the length. So I've put all these images on the right side to illustrate the spectrum from TikToks that are 30 seconds all the way to a full-length documentary. Theoretically, you can do good science communication at any length, right? Whereas on the flip side, if your content is not interesting or valuable to the audience, then they won't even be willing to watch 30 seconds of it. So rather than worrying too much about the length, instead, think about how your video is engaging and holding the audience's attention from start to finish. And that comes back to, once again, tailoring your message to your audience, giving it that good narrative structure so that the audience can easily follow along. And generally, all the same advice will apply as with public speaking or any other form of communication. Things like starting with a good hook, don't be overly repetitive or include unnecessary information, don't talk too fast or too slow, don't speak in a monotone voice, right? All of these are ideas that can also apply to video. And also think about the pacing of your visuals. How frequently are you changing what's appearing on the screen? And you want to also throw in some variety so you can alternate between close-ups and wider shots, for instance. And if you use background music, just be very cautious because that can become a bit monotone if you have like the same music constantly throughout. And it's really important that your music is not too loud and competing and making it hard to focus on the actual message. So if you try to follow these general principles of what makes good communication, I think that you will naturally arrive at the right length for your project. And more importantly, you'll keep the audience engaged from start to finish. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's talk about a few best practices for accessibility. And we do have some links to more in-depth resources at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to quickly go over the basics here. First, this is something that applies not just to video, but to all visual media, is having sufficient color contrast and also being mindful of how your color combinations may appear to people with different forms of color blindness. So if you're ever in doubt about this, there are online tools for you to check if your color combinations are acceptable based on the established guidelines. And I have a picture of a traffic signal there as a reminder that you ideally should not use color alone as the only way of differentiating information. So, in the case of the traffic light, the lights are always in the same position relative to each other, and that allows even people who are colorblind can still interpret it correctly just based on the position. So that's a good practice for you to keep in mind. And then specifically for video, if your video has any dialogue or any audio at all, it needs to have captioning. And the good news there is that you typically don't really have to worry about that until your video is done, because a lot of the platforms these days will automatically generate captions for you. There are a couple of caveats to that. So they do tend to have mistakes. And so you have to go back and proofread those and edit them so that they're correct. And that whole process is going to differ based on exactly what platform you're using to upload your video. So I encourage you to think ahead about that. Think about where your video is eventually going to live and look into the accessibility features on that platform. Look at how the captions appear, look at how you can upload a transcript, and also pay attention to any UI elements that are covering up part of the video. And that way, by looking into that in the early planning stage, you'll be prepared when you go into production. You'll know what those safe margins are, so you can avoid placing your content anywhere that it's going to end up being covered up. And so with that, I think we're ready to move on to production. So I'll hand it over to Lauren.
Yeah, so wonderful. Once you've got a good plan and you've considered all these things, you're going to go ahead into production, which is where you're going to collect or produce your visuals. Usually it's a combination of both. This could be shooting footage or finding stock footage, creating or finding a stock animation, doing any interviews that you want to do with subject matter experts, and collecting B-roll, which I'm going to play a fun video for you guys about that in just a second. B-roll is just kind of like what supplements your video and shows and illustrates the action that you're talking about. Really important if you are shooting your own footage to make a shot list. And that is literally just a list of all the shots that you want to get. So for example, if I were doing a video about a research team in the field and about the work they were doing, my shot list might look like, okay, I want a wide shot of the entire field camp. I want a medium shot of a scientist writing in a notebook. I want a close-up of a scientist looking through a microscope. I want a medium shot of a couple scientists together talking. So you would just write down every kind of shot that you want to get, and then when you're filming, that way you keep track of everything that you've shot and seeing where there any gaps are. If you decide to write a script that you're going to read aloud as a voiceover, as a narration, make sure you read it out loud before you finalize it, because sometimes we write things differently than when we speak them. And when you read it aloud, you'll see, okay, am I stumbling over any of these words? Does this not really make sense to speak aloud? It just gives you an extra layer of protection there. You do not need expensive equipment. Now, so you can totally shoot everything on a smartphone if you wanted to. That's not to say that a professional camera or microphones, things like that can't help you. They are super helpful. But if you don't have access to them, that's okay. What I do is when I usually go out and shoot video, I have both. I have a DSLR camera that I use for photos and for video, and then I also use my smartphone. So I do both, and sometimes I usually end up using a combination of them in the end, because my iPhone can really easily do things like time lapses and slow motion that are a little harder to do on a professional camera. So think about what kind of equipment you want to use. Don't neglect the audio, and we do have some more information about audio at the end of the presentation as kind of a bonus content. We didn't want to go over it here in the interest of time, but we do have some tips there. So yeah, good quality audio is really important too. It's not just the visuals. Bad audio can really turn off your audience. Like Maria said, vary your shots up, get a collection of wide shots, medium shots, close-up shots, and play with the timing as well. And so I'm going to play for you guys this fun video about B-roll.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll. We got that B-roll. Two men pointing at an office file? We got that B-roll. Boy man flipping through channels? We got that B-roll. Angry man in traffic? Yeah, we got that B-roll. What do you want him to wear? Casual? Upscale casual? Business? We got that B-roll. Why does he look so upset? Maybe he's late for work. Nope, he's at work. He's a B-roll actor. Happy couple walking on the beach. We got that B-roll. Want that happy couple to kiss? No problem. Want him to get a little fresh with the lady? Done. Hey, you two, cut it out and stay at the ocean so I can get B-roll of that. That's better. What a nice view of the ocean. That's B-roll of the ocean. Think that's all the B-roll we got? Not even close. Overwhelmed man trying to pay bills? Yeah, we got it. Frustrated man looking for a job in the paper? You know we got it. And lunch meeting success. Hey, look, that's me. I like my B-roll so much I'm in it. Kirk Gibson hitting a game-winning home run in the '88 World Series. No! That's too specific. That is not B-roll. Doctor talking to smiling patient. We got that B-roll. Man having trouble sleeping. Got it. What's his problem? He doesn't like being in B-roll? I was just in some B-roll and I loved it. The sneezer, backache, headache, and depressed woman touching a wall. Why is he touching the wall? I don't know. That's what depressed people do, right? Don't judge the B-roll. Listen, we got all that B-roll and thousands more. So come on down to our B-roll warehouse. Just kidding. That's B-roll. I told you. See? That's how good our B-roll is. We got that B-roll. We got that B-roll. You know we do. To order your B-roll, call 1-800-BBB-ROLL. That's 1-800-BBB-ROLL. Call now.
Awesome. So now you understand what B-roll is. All right, once you've collected all of your footage, all of your visuals, your audio, you're going to go into post. This is the fun, really exciting part. The general steps you're probably going to follow are, you're going to first create a rough cut. This is kind of bare bones version of your video. This is where you're going to place all your audio and your narration, your audio and your video together in your editing program, put them in the order that you want. At this point, you're probably not going to add any music or other enhancements like transitions or anything. You just want, the point at this point, the purpose is to get your story into the right order and to make sure that it makes sense. So once you do that, you want to get feedback like from, different people, friends, colleagues, whoever it may be, to see if they're understanding it, to see if it's making sense to them, if they're getting bored at any or zoning out at any point during your video. So once you do that, once you've got it all in the order that you want, the story makes sense, there's no holes, you're going to go in and create a fine cut. So this is where you're just going to refine your rough cut. You're going to add all those finishing elements, maybe your background music, transitions between shots, branding, if you have that as well. You're going to get it to a point where it's close to where you want it. Once it's close, get more feedback. Super helpful. Get it at every stage here. Once you've gotten your feedback and you keep refining, you're going to refine until you are super happy with it and you're ready to put it down for good. And then you export and distribute however you want. That's going to be your final cut. And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and go into animation. And Maria's going to lead this one off.
All right, so there are many different ways of making animation and different ways that it can look. So I've selected 3 different examples here across the top that are all related to the same general topic of the immune system. And by the way, I like the immune system as a topic because it is extremely complex and technical. And so as a science communicator, I think that you can learn a lot from seeing how different videos tackle that subject. But for the moment, we're just going to be looking at the animation style. So I think 2D and 3D are probably pretty self-explanatory to everyone. The one that you might not be as familiar with is the 2.5D. So if we could maybe look at that one. Yeah, so this is a pretty common technique these days. And basically, it's when you have 2D imagery. It's 2-dimensional images, but you animate it in a 3D space. So if you were to compare it to the 2D one, maybe you could play that one again, you'll see that the 2.5D has just a little bit more depth than what you have with the basic 2D. And of course, there is no limit to all the ways that you can combine these different styles together. But you kind of have to make a choice during pre-production of what general style or technique you want your animation to be, because that's going to determine what software and tools you end up using. So typically 2D is going to be the easiest and the fastest type of animation to do. That's the style that I tend to work in, and so that's what I would recommend for you as well. If we look at the 3D one again really quickly, it looks amazing, right? But it is going to have a much steeper learning curve to do that. There are a lot of additional steps in the 3D animation process. So then the 2.5D might be a good middle ground if you want to have that little bit more sense of depth, but going fully 3D might not be as feasible. So we are going to talk a little bit more about software later, and we'll get into which software is good for these different styles. But then moving on to the bottom row, if we take a look at the motion graphics example, this is a very popular style in marketing and social media these days. So basically, that's like traditional graphic design and adding motion to it. So you see a lot of geometric shapes and text. And this is a good way of adding a lot of visual interest without actually using imagery. So in your videos, you could use something like this if you're transitioning from one scene to the next, or maybe there's a quote or a sentence that you really want to emphasize and put that up on the screen. So you can take inspiration from examples like this. And next, character animation. That's exactly what it sounds like. You're just animating the characters within your scene. And you might think that animating a character seems really hard and there's no way you could ever do that. But actually, there are a number of tools available now that make it pretty easy. And you can do some really decent looking character animation even if you have no prior experience. And again, we'll talk about some of those tools later on. And then lastly, out of all of these examples that we've shown, stop motion is going to be the only animation technique where the images are not computer generated. So if you're not familiar with that, it's basically taking a series of photographs of physical objects, and then those photographs become the frames of your animation. And I believe Lauren is going to have an example to show us of a science video that uses stop motion. So next slide, please. So Lauren explained those 3 stages of production, and those do apply to animation as well, but there are just a few differences I want to point out that are specific to the animation process. And one of those differences is that in live action, it's actually expected that you should record extra footage, and not everything you record is going to be used in the final product, because what you want to avoid is when you're editing and you don't have enough footage, right? So when it comes to animation, it's kind of the opposite of that, because if you're taking the time to fully animate something, you expect that you are going to use all of that animation. You don't want that work to be wasted. So all of that to say, the planning and the pre-production is really essential when you're creating animation to keep that process efficient and avoid that kind of wasted effort. So one step that you can take, which we haven't mentioned yet, is to create an animatic. And that's basically just taking the storyboards that you created, which are the rough static images, and you just cut them together in the form of a video. And so it has the timing and also any voiceover that you're planning to use. So it's like a step between storyboarding and your rough cut, and that gives you one more chance to review and make any revisions before you actually start animating. So I've included an example from my own work, and we can just play both of these simultaneously so you can see how the animatic is really rough drawings that's on the top, but it has overall the same timing and flow compared to the final animation that's on the bottom. And by the way, you can do this like the animatic and storyboarding. You could do that in PowerPoint if that's what you're most comfortable with. So another thing I want to point out that's specific to animation, we typically record the voiceover first. And so that means that the script should be basically finalized before you do the animation. The reason for that is so then we use the voiceover when we're animating so that the animation is perfectly timed and synchronized with the voiceover. And that's just a lot more efficient than trying to edit the timing after the fact. And lastly, we can stop playing those, by the way. But so you want to think about during pre-production, identifying the assets that you're going to use. And when I say assets or artwork, I'm referring to all those visual components that are going to be animated in the final product. So in this example with the kidney, you know, when you see the view of the outside of the kidneys, that's one asset. Then like this view where it's like the cross section, that's another asset, and so on. So all of these assets are things that you either need to create them yourself or you need to get them from somewhere. And so as you're storyboarding, that's when you want to think carefully about planning your shots such that you can reuse the same assets as much as possible. And that way you don't need a different asset for every single shot. Okay, next slide. And back to you.
Yeah, this is me. So there are these 2 Disney animators who laid out what they call the 12 principles of animation. If you're interested in seeing all of them, you can totally click this link to the video that describes all of them. The ones that I find the most useful that have in my work are staging, slow in, slow out, and squash and stretch. So I'm going to go through these. I'm actually going to play this staging video, and this applies to all videos, not just animations. But this explains what it is really well.
This video is based on the 12 principles of animation as described by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So the 3rd principle of animation is called staging. Staging is the presentation of any idea so that it is completely and unmistakably clear. This is a very broad principle because it covers so many areas of animation. It can apply to acting, timing, camera angle and position, and setting. So when you're animating, you want to be in full control of where the audience is looking. You're essentially saying, look at this, now look at this, and now look at this. This control is achieved through staging.
All of the elements of the scene work together to move the viewer's eyes around the screen. Here's an example of bad staging. The characters are competing for stage presence, so the viewer doesn't know which one to look at. The camera has a lot to do with this. It's important to know when to be close up and when to be far away. Far away is good for big actions, while close up is good for expressions. Don't have the main action be off to the side. It should be either in the center of the screen or in one of the thirds of the screen. If they're facing to the side, there should be more empty space in the direction that they're facing, unless someone's sneaking up behind them, in which case they would no longer be the main character of the shot. The main action of the scene should be very clear and simple. It can't be upstaged by other things that are going on. This takes attention away from the main point. It should also have proper timing. Let one action finish before the other person starts their action, instead of overlapping them. Sometimes you need to insert pauses if there's something on the screen that needs to be processed by the viewer before moving on. Sometimes if there's any text on the screen, you should keep it on screen for as long as it takes to read it out loud 3 times. But it's not just about controlling the viewer's eyes. It's also about conveying ideas. If a character is sad, for example, you want to make sure that the viewer knows that and feels that. If someone's house is supposed to be very poor and decrepit, go over the top to make sure that they get it, and don't have any objects that detract from that purpose. Let's take this scene and give it the staging treatment. This fat guy is eating pizza. The idea that we want to convey is that he is a severe overeater. So let's set the stage more. Let's give him more pizza and put piles of pizza boxes behind him and stains on his shirt. Let's move the camera down below him to make him look bigger. And let's change his acting so that his weight actually gets in the way of his eating, so he can't even reach for the soda without falling over. Now let's make sure to time it right so he notices the soda and then reaches for it. Now the idea is very clear. So that's all I have for staging. The next.
All right, yeah, staging. It covers a lot, but it is super important. That's maybe the thing that drives my video production the most. The next for animation is called slow in, slow out. This is also called easy ease or ease in or ease out. The idea is that you want to animate movement, and this is movement of anything. Like it could be a person, character walking, it could be a car, it could just be a ball bouncing, molecules coming together and forming a compound, or elements coming together forming a compound. Whatever is moving, what you want to do to make it more realistic is to have the movement start off slow, get faster, and then slow at the end. And a way to visualize this, think about, I have 2 cars up here. So you're leaving home in the morning, you're going to work. The car starts off slow, gets fast, and then slows down when it approaches. On the bottom, it goes constant, and it just looks more mechanical. And that's not how things work in real life. In real life, like if I were coming over to talk to Jessica, I'm stopped now. I would start off slow, I get faster, but when I get closer to her, I slow down because I don't want to run into her. So that's just a little more natural movement. And this is actually super easy to do in any animation program. You basically have to just like click an option to make it go in and ease in and out. You don't have to do it yourself. So keep that in mind. And the last is squash and stretch. And this just really gives your video a little bit extra like whimsy and charm and makes it more interesting.
Hey guys, so I decided to make a video series dedicated to the 12 principles of animation as described by the legendary animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So the first principle is squash and stretch. This is the principle that animated objects will get longer or flatter to emphasize their speed, momentum, weight, and mass. Here's a bouncing ball that has squash and stretch. And here is one without squash and stretch. See the difference? The amount that an object squashes and stretches says something about its mass. The more squash and stretch, the softer the object. The less squash and stretch, the stiffer the object. This first one looks like a water balloon, and the second one probably would be a bowling ball. Squash and stretch applies to characters too. Look at how this figure is stretching from the speed that he's coming down with, and then he squashes after he lands before settling in his pose. You can also use squash and stretch to exaggerate facial expressions. Let's add some squash and stretch to this face. When his eyes are closed, his face is squashed, and when he opens his eyes in disbelief, his face stretches up and settles back to normal. It's very important to keep the volume of the object consistent. This is what a lot of people mess up with when they're first trying to do squash and stretch. They'll elongate the ball like this and flatten it like this. This is what you should not do. The overall volume of the ball must be the same. So as the ball gets longer, it also gets narrower. When it gets flatter, it also gets wider. The same goes with cubes. If you're going in with one line, the other lines must go in the opposite direction. The cube should start out narrow, get flat, get narrow again, and then rest. In betweening with cubes is easy because you can measure the line in between the two lines and then connect them to make the cube. If you master squash and stretch with cubes, the next step is to try to do it in 3D. Another important note is that the ball does not have to be stretching the entire time that it's falling. When it's just starting to fall, it should have its normal shape for the most part. And then when it's just about to hit the bottom, that's when it has the most stretch. So do not overdo squash and stretch in this sense. All right, that is all I've got for squash and stretch.
All right.
Hey guys, so I decided this video is based on a series of animation.
Of course. There we go. All right. So thinking about your workflow when you're animating, when you're doing video editing, you can pretty much do it all in one program. With animation, you probably will need more than one program. And what programs you use are dependent on your own style, your own preferences, what you have access to. So I'll give you an idea of my typical workflow. I usually use the Adobe Creative Suite. If I don't use it exclusively, I use other things too, but usually I do these three main programs. So I will use Adobe Illustrator, which is a digital illustration program, to maybe create a background that I'm going to eventually, or the what's behind what I'm animating, or maybe a starting illustration that I'm going to animate. So I'll maybe do that in Illustrator, maybe use AI, and I'll show you an example of that later. Then the bulk of my animating work, where I'm just adding all those movements and things, are going to be done in After Effects, which is a specific animation program. And then I'll do all the final polishing in Premiere Pro. So it might be where I add music or voiceover, transitions, etc., and export my final video. And Maria, do you want to talk about your notes too here at the bottom?
Yeah, so first I'll just echo what Lauren said. My own process that I use is pretty much exactly the same. And yeah, I added a couple additional notes here really quick. I just want to remind everyone to save your files frequently, because these software tools, they can be a little unstable sometimes. And so you just want to have multiple versions and backups just in case. And my other note is to work in multiple passes. And this is really just a time management tip, because time really can fly when you're working on things like this. And so you don't want to get yourself too bogged down finessing one part of the animation and then not have enough time left to complete the rest of it. So, you know, just try to complete one full pass, a rough pass, before you go back to refine. And that's all I wanted to add.
Awesome. So what are you actually going to use to create a video or animation? So there's tons of different tools out there. So in the pre-production stage, there's a bunch of storyboard templates and tools you can use. I've added my own storyboard template in there too. You're free to use it and adapt it however you like. Also tools for creating shot lists, templates, and this tool that describes what a shot list is in more detail than I did. When you're getting ready to edit, there are actually editing and recording video. There are a couple different options. You can go with non-pro software, which can do most basic editing tasks. It rearrange and trims your clips or your shots. You can add music, things like that, audio. There's a couple different options. Headliner is a free online tool, which is great. iMovie, if you have a Mac. Premiere Rush, which is an Adobe product. They basically took Premiere Pro and stripped it down to some basic elements and made it Premiere Rush, so it has a lower barrier to entry than Premiere. We have Camtasia, which I'll have Maria talk about because she has more experience with that than I do. It's kind of like straddles this world. But then the pro software, you can, again, the Adobe Creative Suite is wonderful. DaVinci Resolve is a free one also. This was originally kind of developed for you doing color correction, but it is now just a really great video editor as well. Maria, do you want to say something about Camtasia?
Yeah, I do have an example towards the end I can show of a video I made with Camtasia. I'll just say for now that I think it's a good alternative if you have access to it or if you choose to pay for it. It's a little bit easier, I think, compared to something like Premiere. I think it has a little less of a learning curve, but it can still do a lot of the same things.
And then there are tons of other tools and resources available to you. So if you need free stock imagery or stock footage, there's tons of stuff. A lot of the stock footage sites, you do have to pay for, like with a subscription. Adobe stock, I mean, but they have so much stuff in there. It's totally worth it. What I use now is Motion Array, and I sometimes use this other one, Envato Elements. You pay a subscription every month, but you have tons and tons of motion graphics, already made animations, stock video footage, etc. It's really fabulous, and I'll show you some examples of that later. Adobe Podcast is great for cleaning up voiceovers. The Measure of Things is a good social math tool. It just finds comparisons for you. So if you remember that British Antarctic Survey video that I showed where they said the Thwaites Glacier is about the size of the UK or the size of the state of Florida, that's a social math comparison. You're just comparing the size or amount of something to something that's already known. If you don't know how to do that, that's okay. This website will help you. You just put in your number, your unit, whatever it is, and they will find a bunch of comparisons for you. And you can choose your favorite. NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio is amazing. They have a bunch of stock things that you can use for free, and they have produced videos that you can look at for inspiration as well. I go to them a lot, especially for space-related stuff, things with the sun or the solar system, very helpful. NSF also has a multimedia gallery. It's not as comprehensive as NASA's, but works really well. And then some music assets as well. YouTube has a great audio library that I use quite frequently. And then, Maria, you want to cover animation software and tools?
Sure, yeah. So out of this list, I'll just point out some of the ones that I'm most familiar with, starting with Beyond, which is a browser-based online tool. It's really easy to get started with. Unfortunately, it's not free, but you can do a free trial. And there's another alternative called Animaker, which I have not used, but it looks very similar. And I believe that one does have a free version. So these are great for character animation, 2D animation, like you can design a character and basically there's a ton of pre-built assets and animations that you can like drag and drop and put together a scene without really having to create anything yourself. So I have an example of a video I made using that that I can show later on. So then moving on to After Effects, as we've mentioned already, the Adobe software, it's pretty dominant in this industry, and that's what I use for most of my work is After Effects. It's great for 2D animation, but it can also have a lot of 3D capabilities as well. But compared to something like Beyond, After Effects is like on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of it does cater more to professionals and creating more like custom and original animations from the ground up. And then Blender is a desktop software that I personally haven't used, but it is worth mentioning because it's very popular. It's free and open source, and it's mostly used for 3D animations, but I have also seen people use it for 2D animations as well. And I'll just briefly mention about using code for animation, like say Python or MATLAB. That's also a very viable option. Unfortunately, I can't speak to that because that's not part of my skill set, but I think Lauren is planning to cover more about that in the data viz training that's coming up. So stay tuned for that. And I just want to say to wrap this up that this is not an exhaustive list by any means. So I encourage you to do your own research and find what's going to work best for you because it might not even be on this list, whatever you end up using.
Yeah. Okay. It was Kathy? Huh. That's weird. You can see it fine, Jessica? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, I'm just going to keep going then. So now I want to get to the fun part, which is examples from myself, my own work, Maria's work, and other people's work that we found. Yeah, and like Maria said, we're gonna do a data visualization training early next year, and that's where we'll kind of go over those mathematical animations if you're actually animating data or an equation or something like that. So we're not going to talk about that here. But a couple of pearls of wisdom from me. Use what's already out there. Look at all the stock footage, motion graphics, use AI generated images. And there is so much out there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel and waste your time, or not waste, don't spend your time trying to create something from scratch when something similar already exists. You could probably just take what's out there and modify it, and that'll be way more efficient than starting from scratch. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It can, I mean, in terms of animation, it doesn't have to look movie quality. That's okay. It can be a little more amateur, and that's all right, as long as it gets the point across. Keep your files organized. For two different reasons. Number one, it's just easier and more efficient for you to find everything. Number two, when you're working in an editing program, and you import all of your stock footage, everything that you're going to use to edit, if you move it around afterwards, your editing program isn't going to be able to find it. It's linked to the location on your computer. So if you start moving things around afterwards, it's going to have your edit is not going to work. So keep everything in the same place and make sure that you can find it. Like I said, you always want to plan everything out ahead of time, but who knows? Plans change. You might not get the shot that you want. So, be willing to change the plan or have to go back, shoot again, or shoot more. Just be aware that you might have to do that, and that's okay. And that's totally normal and part of the process. And take a close look at movie trailers and commercials too, because they have to tell stories really quickly, 30 seconds or a minute sometimes. So movie trailers are interesting too, because they can't give away the ending, but they have to take a whole feature-length film and shove it down into a minute or two. So it's really a good exercise in distilling out what the main points are, the interesting parts of the content. For live action video, I recommend focusing on people. Like I said earlier, your audience is going to connect with characters and people and their experiences, but try to only follow a few major characters. I'm not going to play this example for you, but here's the trailer to the documentary Particle Fever. And this was about the scientists who discovered the Higgs boson with the Large Hadron Collider. And there were thousands of people who worked on the collider and on this project, but the documentary picked, I think, 5 or 6 people to focus on. And that was a really great choice because it doesn't, you can remember who the characters are, you get invested in them. Doesn't focus on too many people. Another thing you can do is, like we said, this is a sensory medium. Try to get more sensory elements in there. This filmmaker who made this documentary called The Lake at the Bottom of the World, about a subglacial lake that researchers were studying in Antarctica. And she takes what she calls a sensory verite approach, whereas she tries to create a sense of intimacy and really focus on the senses. So she really focuses on getting close-up shots of things that are cold and the actual action that's taking place. It really makes you feel like you are there experiencing it. So these are 2 things for you trailers for these 2 films that you can watch later on. Oops. Nope. Yep. There we go. And now for Marie.
Okay, so in addition to everything Lauren just said, which I agree with, here's just a few more tips that I would add. First, we didn't go into any hands-on demos or talking about software today, and that's partly because there are so many excellent resources freely available online. So use YouTube, use Google. That's what I do, honestly. So if you're wondering about a particular software or you have a certain type of effect in mind that you're trying to do, just try searching for it, and there's a really good chance that you'll find a tutorial for what you're looking for. And then secondly, I saw some folks had questions about how to visualize abstract concepts, and I know that can be really challenging. So I typically approach that by using visual metaphors. And so I wanted to share some examples with you from my work. And yeah, if we play that top one, please, thank you. This is, again, related to the immune system. And I use this sort of sonar metaphor to represent how the immune cells are on the lookout, so to speak, for the pathogens. And then I have these thought bubbles that represent how the immune system is creating the antibodies. So, of course, this is an extreme oversimplification, right? And it's not accurate per se, but it is getting the main idea across. And the focus of this video was about how vaccines are made. So it would have been impossible and frankly unnecessary for us to try to fully explain how that mechanism actually works. So then if we play the bottom example, this is another metaphor of a race between the immune cells and the virus. So when you're doing this, just be careful that you're being consistent with what certain colors or certain symbols are representing throughout the whole video. And try not to mix your metaphors too much. And that brings me to my final tip, which is to keep it simple. And I say this for your sake so that you don't bite off more than you can chew, but also for the audience's sake. And this goes back to what Lauren talked about with the staging. You know, your audience can really only pay attention to one thing at a time. So really let your message shine through and resist the temptation to add a lot of bells and whistles, because those things tend to ultimately distract from the main message.
Yeah, awesome. Everything Maria said is so spot on. So a couple examples from my own work. This is a video, an animation I made based on work done by Allison Banwell here at CIRES. She had written a paper showing that ice shelves actually fracture under the weight of large meltwater lakes. And so we wrote a news story about it. And then this on the right here, this is a figure from her paper that kind of shows the mechanism that how when a lake of meltwater forms on an ice shelf, it kind of bends, it creates a little bulge in the middle, and then the middle panel shows what happens when the lake drains, it rebounds, and then creates these other rifts that cut through the ice. So what we wanted to do was take this and show it as a process, show how it happens in time. So first thing I did was, okay, actually, let me go back. So here in this figure in her paper, obviously the only thing she could have is static imagery, and she wanted to really simplify it and focus on the ice shelf. So what I wanted to do first was to add a background to put the ice shelf in context. So what I did was I used the AI tool in Adobe Illustrator. You basically just enter a prompt and it will come up with a couple options for you. And I think the prompt I used here was icy ocean landscape. It gave me a couple options. You can see them here. So what I went with was this bottom one. I thought this was really what I wanted to start working with. And when I took that background, I got rid of those little iceberg pieces in the front, and then I added it into After Effects. That was my background. And now I added this ice shelf here, which is what we're actually going to show the animation on, the movement on. And so what it looked like in the end is this. So the point of it was just to, show how this process happens, and what the implication of it is that these cracks make the ice shelf more vulnerable. So that's a super simple animation that got the point across. Yep. There we go. Wait, hold on. Okay. This is another example of how like a little animation is combined with live action video from a science documentary. This is that same documentary I mentioned earlier about the lake at the bottom of the world. This is a quick clip.
So a shear zone is a place where two ice streams are coming together, and they travel at slightly different speeds. Where they're traveling at those different speeds, it creates friction between the two of them, and that friction causes proboscis to open up.
We've got a radar that we're going to be pushing in front of us and looking through the snow down about 60 feet to see if there's any crevasses that are shown down there. Now we look at it from the surface, you really can't see it at all. It looks like flat snow, but underneath there is large crevasses.
So this is really, they had some great, beautiful cinematic shots here. And they show, like you can't see what's going on below, but when you go to that animation, it shows you what you can't see with your eyes. Here we go. You've got, it's really simple. You've just got these arrows moving, showing them direction of the ice. And then here you've got a little diagram or a little cartoon of the this piston bully vehicle right here, searching through with the radar, and then there's the crevasse. This is not super sophisticated. It's just a bunch of black lines, but it gets the point across. All right. Yep. Okay. This is an example of stop motion and stop motion incorporated into live action video and other things. So this is made by Helen Thompson at Science News. I think she's a really brilliant video producer. This was about the gravitational wave discovery last decade. She had to make this video really quickly and be really resourceful. So I'll show you how she solved the problems of trying to visualize two black holes colliding.
That sound signals two black holes colliding in space, not as loud as you'd expect for a monster merger. But back here on Earth, that little chirp represents something revolutionary, the first direct evidence for gravitational waves. Two giant detectors that make up the Advanced Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO for short, picked up waves from the cataclysmic collision of two black holes about 1 billion light years away. The discovery opens up a new window in the cosmos, much like the invention of the telescope did. A century ago, Albert Einstein predicted that big things like planets bend the fabric of space-time. In Einstein's universe, gravity isn't a force, at least not in the way we typically think about forces. It's just what happens when stars, planets, and moons follow those curves. When an object, any object, accelerates, it produces ripples in the fabric of spacetime, known as gravitational waves. These energetic ripples radiate out and compress and stretch that fabric, similar to how sound waves vibrate the air. You produced some gravitational waves this morning when you got out of bed, just really wimpy one. Even two black holes orbiting around each other produce gravitational waves that are too weak for us to detect here on Earth. But when big things like black holes or neutron stars slam into each other, they produce a veritable earthquake in space-time. Scientists have tried to detect waves from such explosive collisions for decades, but picking up the signal is like trying to measure a 1 millimeter change in a stick that's 1,000 light years long. The recently upgraded LIGO has finally succeeded. LIGO splits a laser beam between two 4-kilometer-long perpendicular tubes. The beams bounce off mirrors hundreds of times. When the beams recombine, they cancel each other out. But when gravitational waves from merging black holes hit Earth, they ever so slightly squeeze one tube and stretch the other, which causes the beams to wobble in and out of alignment. That signal crescendos as the black holes merge. If you converted the signal to a sound, this is what you would hear. Evidence of gravitational waves not only means that Einstein was right, it also allows us to observe the universe in a completely new way. Right now, we peer out into the cosmos through telescopes that record light or other forms of electromagnetic radiation. Detecting gravitational waves means we can study space by listening to gravity itself.
Right, just a really great example of resourcefulness and thinking outside the box and using what you have on hand. Yep. There we go. All right, Maria, your example.
Yeah, so these are just the final two examples I'll share with you just to give you an idea of what you can do with some of the different software that we mentioned. So if we play the one on the left, this was one that I created primarily using Camtasia. So I believe maybe this wheel graphic I might have created in After Effects, but everything that you see as far as the way that it's spins around, like the way it just bounced out, this text, the way it's bouncing in and out, that's all done in Camtasia. And it's really easy because those are like preset animations and they already have all that easing and squash and stretch that Lauren talked about. Those are like built into the presets there. So it's really easy to create something that looks kind of dynamic and polished in that way. And then the other example, this was created fully in Vyond. So you can see, like I said, it's 2D animation, it's character animation, and it has like all these backgrounds and things that you see, that's all built into it. Again, this is an online browser-based tool. So it's very approachable, and if you're thinking about telling a story like this, it could be a good option for you. And that's it for my examples.
Awesome. So now we've got like tons of resources for you guys to check out, some inspiration, some creators on YouTube, again, NASA, Quantum Magazine, CIRES, our video YouTube page is up there, my own animation and video profile if you're curious to see some of the stuff that I've done. Science News, TED Ed also has some great videos. I'm not going to go through all these, but yeah, we've got more info for you on accessibility, social media specs, filmmaking, shooting footage, science communication in general. And then us here at the CIRES Comms team, we are always here to help. We have equipment you can use. We have expertise that can help you. So please reach out to us. And so we're pretty much going to end there and go to questions. But if you wouldn't mind taking a second to take a little survey, give us feedback on this training. For those of you who are on Zoom, I will send you a link to this as well. Oh yeah, if you want to throw it in the chat, awesome. Yes, we're gonna have someone throw it into the chat right now. Thank you guys.
Yeah, I can put it in there. Great, thanks.
So this will just help us tailor future trainings and see how we did today. We hope that you can do this. And with that, we will open it up for questions, comments, anything else you want to talk about. Yeah. Everyone on Zoom has a question or something they want to say, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and just talk. Or you can write it in the chat and we'll get to it. Awesome. Great. Yeah, like I said, we'll send all of this to you guys afterwards and we hope it was helpful.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned like wide, medium, and like close shots. How do you differ between those? Like you're talking about like this has like the full area of the research people, like a subset of the people. Or like, kind of, can you go to that a little bit?
Yeah. So yeah, shot. So yeah. It's kind of nebulous, I should say. There's no like really like set definition, but a wide shot is basically like kind of like a big landscape shot, a shot of an entire building, a park. Like just think about a really big wide area, a house. And then a medium shot would be like a person, a couple people maybe together. And then a close-up would be like someone's face or part of their body, or something that like maybe looking on your phone. A term that we use a lot too is called an establishing shot. And so this is a shot that is usually a very wide shot at the beginning of a scene, that tells you where the scene is taking place. It establishes the setting basically. So if you think about any sitcom that you watch, let's take Seinfeld, for example, like whenever you see a shot of the outside of the coffee shop, that establishes that the scene's going to take place inside the coffee shop, and then it cuts to them at the table, having their chat. So that would be considered a wide shot or an establishing shot. Anything else? All right, if that's it, we will. Yeah, oh, that's true. Yeah, we'll give you guys a couple more minutes. But okay, good.
And then I gave accidentally submitted a LinkedIn survey also.
I wish that I could be there for the snacks.
I wish you could be here too. Yeah.
Question for Maria, where are you based?
I think the question was where I'm based. I'm in the Milwaukee area, so I'm fully remote.
Yes, and Maria and I are here to answer any questions you might have if you want to go deeper, do a deeper dive into these topics. And like I said, we'll be doing more trainings coming up, so we hope that you join us. I'll give you guys another minute for questions and then we will let you all go and get on with your day. Yeah,
So for the resources that you shared, is there also like very easy, like basic tutorials or like bootcamp
mm-hmm.
of things that you can do like as like a follow on that you step by step just try doing this and
Yeah,
create like a small animation and things like resources like that, the links that you have shared or anything else you have in mind.
I don't have anything specifically in there, but well, actually, Adobe might. I'll see if I can find some for you. Adobe has really good tutorials too that have you actually like create something as you're going along. So I'll add those in. Yeah.
Speaking of which, you
Yeah.
said that you'll share the slides with everybody, and how are you going to guys that just like do their registration?
Yep.
Okay. So if
Yep.
you did register, it's still.
No, I will figure it. I'll find out how to get it to
Yes.
everybody. Oh, great. Yeah, okay, that was a great, that's a great question. Yeah, so for those of you who joined but didn't register ahead of time, that's totally okay. We are happy to have you. I will get, yeah.
I would put some email in the chat and then you just reach out to us as I work.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, put CIRES News at Colorado. Yeah, we're gonna throw an email in the chat. So if you if you didn't register and you want to get these materials, shoot us an email at ciresnews@colorado.edu. It's right up here. And we'll get them to you, get the slides and the recording and all of that. Please feel free to reach out for that, for anything else. If that's it, I will give you guys back the rest of your day. Thank you for Maria for joining us and sharing your expertise with us. And we hope to see you again.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Thank
know
you,
it was a
guys.
lot of information, but I hope it was helpful.
It was a lot, but thanks. And now if you're around CIRES, come get some snacks.
Bye.
Bye. I'm gonna end.